Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is, wherever you are right now. Thank you for tuning in to the Conversations with Dr. Don show. The show is produced and broadcast from the Portland, Oregon area. For your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about what we've decided to talk about tonight. So tonight we will talk about topical issues as of May 13, 2019. Among those topical issues are America's constitutional crisis, America's constitutional crisis, and planetary crisis, and the end of our democracy, the end of life. The end of our democracy, the end of life. So those are going to be some pretty top topics to talk about. And glad Morbett hasn't been on for a while. It's been on 1,000 times. And good to see you again.
It's good to see you too.
Refreshing to see you again, yeah. And Kathy, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Yeah. It's good to see you too.
That sense of humor is really outstanding, yeah. So, because you've been on so many times in the past, we'll talk a rather brief bio about who you are.
Yeah.
And
there's better things to talk about.
Never. Because things change from day to day anymore, even in your life, huh? The bio?
Yes.
All right. So, from your memory, talk about your bio, who and where you came from, and your childhood, that sort of thing, your education. Shall I ask you questions? Or shall you?
Whatever you prefer.
All right. My favorite question, if I ask your best friend, who is Lloyd? What would your best friend say? Lloyd is?
Well, ask her.
You really want to know?
I do. I do.
Yeah.
Longtime activist, warrior in the fight to save our planet.
There you have it.
And you've got a soft voice, so you might raise your voice a little bit. Yeah.
I'll have to project a little.
Hey, and when and where were you born, Lloyd?
I was born on July 16th, 1947 in Columbus, Ohio.
Columbus, Ohio.
I have no real memory of it, but that's where it happened.
Here we're starting.
Supposedly.
And your national or cultural heritage or racial heritage, you got anything mixed in there other sides
Oh,
of
that's
plain old white
interesting.
bread?
That brings me back to my T-shirt, you know. What is it? My race is humanity, my religion is love.
Yeah, I like that.
I do too.
Yeah. Religious preference, did you have one before and do you have one now?
Well, I didn't like Sunday school too much. Went through a lot of that. So, you know, my religious preference is to have peace on earth.
Yeah, that's religious, yeah.
Yeah.
Were you raised in an organized religious environment?
Both of my grandfathers were Presbyterian ministers.
Did that affect you?
Wide-angle Saxon Protestant. Of course it did. Everything that happens to you when you're born affects you, and I was born into it.
Yeah.
Both of my parents were preachers' kids, and you know how they talk about how preacher kids are screwed up, so look who raised me.
And we talked about your education before. You're mostly self-educated because you had so much formal schooling, but then you keep going on and on and on.
They never put me in college, so I just had to do it on my own.
And you did a wonderful job, didn't you ever?
Well, I always think that I never really do know enough. So.
Who does know enough?
Yeah, I know. There are people that claim they know everything. I can think of one person we're going to talk about.
No, we're not going to go there tonight. I'm so sick of that. It's on the television everywhere.
Come on.
You read a lot.
I do read a lot. In fact, I brought my book collection with me.
Oh, man, yeah, that's just beautiful. Oh,
yeah.
The sixth extinction. Oh, my God.
Not beautiful, Dr. Don. Unfortunately, none of those books are beautiful.
Uh-huh.
I haven't finished. I like E.O. Wilson, you know.
Oh, yes.
He's a wonderful man.
Mm-hmm.
And Half Earth, Our Planet's Fight for Life
Uh-huh.
is a beautiful book. I mean, it really gives me insight into the kind of human being that Edward Wilson is. I mean, how his natural curiosity led him to become greatly interested in the life around him and the exploration that he made for that. And it opens insight into my mind as to how, you know, biodiversity works. I've never really thought about it from the perspective of E.O. Wilson, but this book does it. And of course, this book addresses the book I read I think about maybe 4 months ago called The Sixth Extinction, which is ironically, you know, the state of affairs that we're in now. We just recently were warned, see, you're getting me into my later notes here, but where the United Nations has just released another study on May the 6th, 2019, entitled Nature's Dangerous Decline, Unprecedented Species Extinction Rates Accelerating. And this comes from another intergovernmental panel, the Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystems. And that's why when we talk about this evening's program, we basically, you know, are attempting to address what is maybe the coming end of life. If we don't, being part of the Anthropocene time, the new epoch that's replaced the Holocene, we now have become an epoch on the planet. And, you know, sadly enough, if we can't do something about ourselves, we may see the end of life on Earth as we know it. And they're projecting just recently, a million species that will disappear off the planet in the next several decades. I mean, it's mind-boggling.
Okay, let's do the preliminaries first.
You want to get back to the preliminary. Don't want me to talk about the other book, do you? I got you.
Of course, And when you were working for a living, what did you do?
Oh, geez, I started, you know, the first thing I did was mow lawns, and I haven't gotten away from that job.
You didn't want to go back that far.
Oh, I thought you wanted to go back. You know, I used to shovel snow, and then I worked in grocery stores, and then I worked in Montgomery Wards in the service department, and then I sold newspapers on the street and became involved in the anti-war movement, and then, you know.
How long have you been a lefty?
I don't, you know, it's funny, I never thought of myself quite that way, but, you know, I just been, I mean, I don't know, was it working in a grocery store that made me lefty?
It was
I can't tell how many shovels of snow did this to me. I mean, I don't know.
It was selling candles, probably.
It could be, yeah, that's right. It used to be a candle maker. I used to sell candles along with the underground newspapers, the Willamette Bridge and the Portland Scribe, and I've done all kinds of different things.
I know, that's why I asked you the same question again, because it'll be different next time.
Yeah, probably will be. It just depends on where you open up in the old brain cells that are remaining.
Yeah. And so did you have a formal job, a profession, or trade, anything of that? To say you're part
Well,
of
you know, I guess if
working
anything,
class.
my profession was staying alive.
Uh-huh.
You know, I was also involved in, you know, my father took me down and joined me up in the Navy and, you know, sent me out to Vietnam, and, you know, now I'm an Agent Orange veteran, so I've gone through that. I'm going through that experience now. And
When were you in Vietnam?
I was in Vietnam, 1969, 1970. So.
Did you get wounded?
I got harmed by, I guess,
Agent
Orange, and I didn't realize it at the time, but now all my, the health effects that I'm experiencing now are all symptoms of Agent Orange exposure.
Are you being compensated for that?
There's no compensation enough for this.
Of course, there
I don't really, it's too bad I couldn't get compensated for all my activist work. In fact, it's too bad that all the activists out there could. I always thought maybe I'd end up in the old activist home, along with all the others, and we'd have meetings and disagree, and anyway.
You're so marvelous controlled in your emotional expressions. I know you never get too excited or wave your arms too much.
No, never.
And that rich baritone that so much. And I want to ask you a next question, but I'm going to skip that one because I want to ask you, do you have a wife, a husband, or a companion?
My partner's sitting here next to me. She occasionally shows up and cleans the kennel.
Oh, God, oh, God.
Don't go there.
And these questions I'll ask you anyhow. Your political persuasion, are you left, right, or center, or up too far on the continuum where you got to be considered?
God, am I left, right, or centered? I think I'm all of those things in some way.
Depending on the time of day.
Yeah, right, who knows? Left, right, centered. I don't, I'm on that voyage still trying to understand where it's all going. I think I have a pretty good idea of what we're confronting, but it's always been this voyage, trying to find a place to be. I came to this state by accident. My life is kind of like been this accident in motion.
And he enjoys himself so much. That's why.
Oh, yeah, right.
I love you, buddy. I do. Yeah. And any children, great-grandchildren, anything like that?
I have a daughter who is, she's 59 years old now.
Oh, my God.
And I have a son who is 32 years old. And both children have nurtured my heart and allowed me to understand what loving and, the act of bringing new life into the world, what that's all about.
Do they appreciate you?
I don't know. Sometimes it's a question.
He did it.
Oh, I think they do.
Of course they do. Okay, now comes the tough questions.
Uh-oh.
The difference between sympathy and empathy. Remember that? I asked you that before.
Sympathy and empathy.
Yeah.
Sympathy is where I guess you feel sorry for someone. Empathy is where you share you feel their pain, their suffering, whatever, their joy.
And you let them know it.
Yeah.
By
Well, that's a motivator, I think. Sympathy is kind of like, geez, I feel bad about that, let's go play. Empathy is kind of like, hey, I got to do something about this.
Well,
I don't know if that's a good definition or not, but anyway.
I like that, yeah. Is there a lack of empathy in the government today?
Oh, my God. We're in a constitutional crisis.
Okay.
I mean, we have someone who does not seem to connect with the people in any real way. He only connects with himself. And because of it, we are suffering.
Narcissism personified, right?
And it's funny, I guess I can't really speak for everybody because, this is a showman that manages to bring crowds together and play on their emotions, and he's what I would call a consummate demagogue.
You speak for a lot of us.
Yeah, I think there's people that feel the way I feel, but I don't understand. I guess it's like, that old adage, you can fool some of the people some of the time, you can fool all the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. This guy's trying to go to all the time for everyone.
It's scary. And
it is.
That's why we're talking about a planetary crisis, the end of our democracy, the end of life. So I see where you're
We're talking about a
from.
constitutional crisis.
Yeah.
in the heart of a planetary crisis, because the planetary crisis supersedes it all. And the person that we have who has, this self-declared king, has basically determined that the planetary crisis doesn't exist. And how, oh my God, how tragic is all that?
Is his greed big enough to encompass what he is about?
Well, greed is what he's all about.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, from the moment that he became president and declared that he would not separate himself from his business enterprises, was the first message. Hey, this guy's in it for himself. He's not going to let go of his need to accumulate, and he's a good accumulator, building these big towers and filling it with gold. But it's at the expense of us all, especially when you're in a planetary crisis that's impacted by his decisions. Doing away with the Environmental Protection Agency, instantly getting rid of regulations across the board. All that opens the door for the, those who prey on others to rush through.
Yeah. Memberships in political, social, or civic organizations, you belong to a lot of those. Name a couple, three that you belong to.
Organizations that I belong to? Well, I guess I'm still a part of the Progressive Party. I've been involved in the campaign finance reform effort. And of course,
it's a dream.
Right, and of course I'm the executive director of the Oregon Conservancy Foundation, and my boss is one of the board members sitting next to me. So,
what is the Oregon Conservancy Foundation? You got a few words about that?
It basically was created out of a lawsuit's involvement with Pacific Power and Light and Portland General Electric for illegally charging ratepayers for the nuclear power plants that they were trying to build. So, and all that really, I mean, the Conservancy Foundation kind of happened to me. I never saw that one coming, but I as I voyaged through life, I came upon someone else, actually two lawyers, Dan Meek, Lyndon Williams.
Dan Meek,
and they changed my life. I mean, they took the work that I was doing and went in and took the effort that we were making to stop nuclear power, and then involved themselves in the Public Utility Commission rate proceedings, and lo and behold, it was discovered that the utilities were gaming the people. They were illegally charging ratepayers for plants that weren't even there.
Why were you so hard on Hanford?
Well, actually, it's others that really deserve the credit for Hanford. I've been concerned about Hanford, and I went up to Hanford and I toured the reservation, and I followed, like Heart of America and other groups that have been involved in that issue, but I can't lay claim to that issue. I'm concerned about it. I know the history of Hanford enough to realize that it's a mess, and it's one that is still living on.
Yeah, okay.
My effort, Don, in nuclear was mainly with the construction and the proposed construction and operation of nuclear power plants.
Yeah.
That's where my effort went in the long years that I was involved. But we're talking too much about this stuff, and we're not. We're talking about everything. We're doing all right. I'm not going to redirect. Where are we going next? You need to talk to the boss here.
Okay, boss. And when and where were you born?
In Buffalo, New York.
Buffalo, New York.
Yes.
You don't sound like a New Yorker.
I've gotten the accent
You're
diminished.
You're talking about
diminished.
And I grew up in upstate New York, but I never met her.
Well, I'm from Western New York, and they have a
I'm from
different,
Binghamton.
if you look at New York City, there's a very distinctive accent, but there's less so on the west side of the state. So I'm from a little town outside
Brooklyn
of...
is different than other...
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's a different world, but I grew up in a very small town outside of Buffalo.
How about, I want to ask you, when you were born, and you told me where. So, anything significant about your racial, national, or cultural heritage?
Well, I have my mom, when she was alive, comes from German ancestry, and my dad from Polish ancestry. And he was from the city, and she was from the country.
Nice mixture.
Yeah, so they blended together, and I'm the outcome. Me and 4 sisters.
Do you have any real education compared to what this guy has?
Well, one of the
She's self-taught, which actually, she's summa cum laude or whatever. I call her summa cum laude, but you know.
so
Lordy.
Especially when she's getting on me.
my parents were poor in their backgrounds, and their desire for their children were that they have dental work, so they would have strong teeth, and they would have eye exams, so they would have good seeing, and that they would go to have a Catholic education. So I had 12 years of Catholic school until I went on my own to college and then graduate school. So I put myself through 8 years of higher education.
Yeah.
So I was a professional student. I liked being a student
I love it. I'm still
in
a student.
small towns. So I love college towns, and I love just the act of learning. And I wasn't quite sure where it would go, and left after I had all but my dissertation in interpersonal communication and counseling, because I was burnt out, because I had worked as a dorm director full-time, and that was while being a full-time graduate student. So I came west to have a rest, and I never went back. So
Do you still pray the rosary?
no, in fact, my parents would they wish. I think that while they were alive, they prayed a lot about that.
Because you needed prayers.
I'm not a practicing Catholic anymore, but once you're a Catholic, you're always a Catholic. But
That's
some
what
of
they
us
say.
practice, and I have I have an identical twin sister who's a very devout Catholic, and she does the rosary, and she does novenas. So every once in a while, I'll ask her for one.
She does it.
She does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you talk to her from time to time?
Oh, lots. Yeah.
And you look alike.
Not so
Not
much now,
anymore,
but if you
no.
look at the pictures when they were very young, I can't tell the difference. I don't know who's
My
what.
parents couldn't tell the difference. They called us twin. So I didn't like that until I got out of high school and had my own life.
All right, persons from the past or alive today that you particularly admired or look up to. Any names come to mind for you?
Well,
Except for Lloyd.
yeah.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Yeah, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, yeah. Well, I guess I grew up with
RBG.
RBG.
I was blessed to have grandparents on my mom's side. My mom's parents were alive all the way through probably till I was in my 20s. And we had a small family, very supportive. And so just the love that they shared with their children and their grandchildren was real important to me. And my dad had lost both of his parents, particularly his mom, but he told stories until he died at 96 of his mom and her mom. And so family history has been really important. And my grandmother, her mother, so it's my great-grandmother, came here from Poland. Her name was Antonina Mixtaki. And she was here during the time women were getting the vote. And so when the amendment was passed for women to vote, she went and knocked on doors in her community and said, and I think she was in her 80s, and she said, get out there and do it, because we've fought for it, and now you have to exercise your right to vote. So I admire her greatly.
Yeah, so your grandmother,
Yeah, and great-grandmother. Yeah.
you admire those people.
Yes.
Anybody from...
And my mom, she taught 37 years, and she started teaching when I was in 4th grade. And she came to the same Catholic school I was in and started teaching 4th grade. And she taught for 37 years, and she had a high school education at the time. So not only was she raising 5 daughters who were born within 5 years, but she also, she taught for 37 years. And to this day, there are people all over that little town who would see her in the grocery store, and she taught their children and started to teach their grandchildren before she retired. So
Tis no wonder you admired her.
I do.
respect her,
I did,
Of them, anyhow.
yes.
Yeah. And how did you get hooked up with this guy?
Well, I met him when I first came out to stay in Salem, Oregon, with some friends, and he would come down to the legislature, and he'd come by. The next door neighbor to where I was living, who's a very dear friend, had this little house, didn't have much furniture in it. We would sit around, and Lloyd would come in and play the guitar and sing, and we would hang out and
Play the guitar. I didn't know.
Long time ago. Long time ago.
And then-
Unfortunately, I've left that behind.
years went by, and I did some of the things that the anti-nuclear movement was doing.
We
at
had
the time.
walkathons, and
I
so
did his walkathon.
She married another man. We had no
Right.
interest at that point in each other. So,
Yeah.
but I was starting to notice her because but her husband was
But the
this
timing
just
wasn't right.
he was just the kind of the class clown in some ways. He was just a wonderful, funny person, and he would attract a crowd, and she'd be off to the side like Buddha with this really beautiful smile watching him do his antics. So,
But anyway, I was living in Salem, and you were not in Salem.
right, that's right. I was living in
helped
Portland.
with passing the 1980 initiative that
Ballot Measure 7.
Ballot Measure 7, which
The measure that we have been fighting to preserve in the legislature. There has been, in the last 3 full legislative sessions, 2015, 2017, and 2019, NewScale, a company that is in the process of getting approval for a reactor design, a modular nuclear reactor design, has a senator who sponsors a bill repeatedly to carve this huge exemption into a law that we passed by ballot measure that says before you can build a nuclear plant in Oregon, you have to show that there's a federally licensed repository for its waste, and then the nuclear plant is put to a vote of all the people in the state. And what NewScale wants to do is they want to be able to build modular nuclear reactors in cities in Oregon, in the cities, not 50 miles out like Trojan was from Portland, but in cities, and that it only gets put to a vote of the local population, not...
Hello.
right.
Yeah, I
So
know.
that was 30 years ago almost 30 years ago that we passed that law.
And she worked hard on that.
Unfortunately, it wasn't constitutional, it was statutory, so the legislature can turn it in a different direction, but it's protected this region from nuclear power plants being built. And that was a long shot. We didn't think it was going to pass, but it passed, and so that was probably the start of me being an activist out here, although at the time I was a therapist, and I've continued to be a therapist.
This kind of provides a segue for me. This is where
yeah.
the friend,
No,
what a
you
friend
don't
would
get-
say. When I first met her, I would say to her, Kath, you need to get involved. She'd go, I'm not an activist. I'm not an activist. And about 3-4 weeks ago, we got in a heated discussion about stuff to where she immediately and adamantly told me that she is an activist.
Well, I am.
And I have lived long enough finally to see that happen. Praise whatever.
So, after 30 years of being a therapist, I'm semi-retired. So I have more time now to do a lot of the
What
things.
kind of a therapist were you?
I work with, and I still do on call, suicidal teenagers.
Oh, man.
at
You're a real tree hugger, aren't you?
in
Oh,
hos-
she's amazing. I
in
mean,
hospitals.
the stories that which she would bring home about the children that she was trying to help.
But
I mean,
The thing is, I would hear these kids say, I don't really trust adults to make the right decisions.
I wonder where they get that
That's
from.
what's happening in their lives. And then I more and more looked around me and thought, adults aren't making very good decisions. Maybe I need to do something about the parts of this that I can make a difference in. You know, I might not be able to change that their parents aren't good resources, but I might be able to change that a city council could do something that would protect their environment.
Did you have any luck?
Yes, actually, I have. We in Vancouver, we stopped an oil terminal. It would have been the biggest
You
oil
know,
terminal in
You guys are so darn interesting until the time
Yeah.
has slipped by, and we need to take a break now,
Okay.
so we
Okay.
have time for the real important stuff.
Okay.
Oh, there's still time for the important stuff.
All right, and okay, how about some break? Yeah, okay. Thanks. We're back. Thanks for staying tuned. And for your viewers who missed the opening of the show, Conversations with Dr. Don that you're watching is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like my guests here. And we are talking about the constitutional crisis, America's constitutional crisis, and the planetary crisis, and the end of our democracy. End of life, yeah. And topical issues. These are certainly topical issues as of May 13, 2019. So let's just jump right in here. We want to allow enough time for Kathy to talk about catastrophic climate change, Zenith Oil Terminal, and what else do we have here? Okay, but you can start
Yeah.
those in later on when
Yeah,
you allow
sure.
enough time if we can shut this guy
Oh,
off.
yeah.
Pardon me.
Fortunately, we both want to bring out all of it.
Yeah.
So then we want to be allow enough time for her to use those.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no
So
kidding.
Why don't you start off with the Constitution?
Well, you called me up, Don, and you said, geez, I want you to come in and talk about impeachment. And I had no idea that you knew that I was an expert on impeachment. It just blew me away.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to become one, of course, because I'm not. And impeachment is, well, ironically enough, Robert Reich, we know who he is,
Oh, yes.
the old Treasury Secretary under Clinton, has published an article on the 11th of May, and he entitles it, "There are many reasons not to impeach Trump. The House should do it anyway." And it really kind of addresses what I think we would be talking about. It addresses, of course, all the reasons why there's concern about doing impeachment, because, the Senate is controlled, it makes the ultimate decision on impeachment, and it's controlled by the Republicans. There's Trump attempting to use impeachment to build his base. The base is always there. And there's just a lot of
Worries
things.
about electability
Yeah,
of Democrats.
Right, and
So political
but
considerations.
the bottom line that he reaches is one that I very much agree with, which is that the founders of this country, the framers, the early framers of the Constitution, wanted to create a system of government that was made up of checks and balances. So they had separation of powers. They had the courts, they had the legislature, and they had the presidency.
Mm-hmm.
And having those three different entities was important because they would act as a check and balance to the concentration of power. And what we have today is the nightmare that they created the impeachment process for. The purpose of the impeachment process is to prevent in this instance, the president from concentrating all power and basically saying, Congress, you're not a part of the
Which
show.
is what he is doing
Exactly.
as we speak.
And he's doing that at the same time he's attempting to change the courts into the same kind of thing as all his other appointments, which is basically just another arm of his power.
I've been doing some further research on the origins of fascism in Spain and Italy and Germany and the steps along the way. I'm looking for the Reichstag Fire here in Washington,
Yes,
D.C.
exactly. And you know, you look at this crisis and it's hard to believe that we're in it. I mean, you know, I remember, you know,
It
going to
can
ski
happen
at
here.
school and seeing the Norman Rockwell paintings on the wall, you know, of democracy and all this kind of stuff. And we've got somebody here now who is attempting basically to destroy the rule of law. That's what it all comes down to.
What are we going to do?
Well, what we have to do, and this is the point that Reich is making as well, is it doesn't matter what you think the outcomes are going to be. The responsibility in the Constitution is if you have someone that's attempting to do this, you have to take them on. And so I realize that there's all kinds of ways that Trump can try and twist and turn this. He's got an attorney general who refuses basically to
creeping successful coup.
Yes, exactly, a creeping coup. And the only way to stand up to a creeping coup is to stand up to it. And that's the responsibility of our legislators and all you people out there. You're going to have your hit when the 2020 election comes, but you need to get a hold of your representatives and your senators, and you need to say to them, your responsibility is to do something about this. Let's do something about this now. And, you know, this bullshit about how, oh, I'm president, I don't have to give you anything, I don't have to honor subpoena powers. Fine, if he wants to play that game, impeach him, because at that point the subpoena powers can't be thwarted that way, at least legally. We'll see.
The responsibility of the legislators is to support the wishes of the super rich, of the people who put them in power.
Not really. I think I know what you're saying, and it's true that that's what has happened. That's the reason why we need campaign finance reform.
Oh boy,
we really need that so desperately. But the bottom line here is even without campaign finance reform, there is a responsibility to preserve the separation of powers and the ability to check and balance the concentration of power into one of those entities, the legislature, the presidency, or the judicial. And so what needs to happen is the Democrats need to do their job. They need to begin impeachment proceedings against this president. It just has to happen. And what I see coming out of that, I mean, there's no magic bullet here, but what I see coming out, the thing that's clear to me is that Trump is operating like a crime boss. And I think there's no question that he committed obstruction of justice. I think, and when you have a crime boss that's basically saying, no, I'm not going to allow you to see the supporting evidence that led up to the Mueller report.
The American mafia?
That the American whatever. I think the time has come to stand up to this man. And we need to take what powers we have remaining, the legislators do, and they need to conduct the proceedings that were outlined by the framers of the Constitution.
Take to the streets.
Well, and the streets is going to be taken to in the election. I think that's really what's going to come out of this.
And there's going to be a real action in a coup sort of a fashion where the right wing is going to institute the first move in an overt coup or rebellion, or revolt.
Well, let's hope not. But that's already ongoing. I mean, that's already ongoing. That's what's happening now is this, the theory of the unitary executive, the executive that is above the judicial and above the legislative, and they have no power to check the balance of that unitary executive.
Executive privilege
Well,
trumps everything.
Well, that's what they're trying to say,
Right.
and that's been going on. That's not new. That's an old theory. Barr, the reason why Barr is Attorney General is because he signaled Trump that that's where he was coming from, and Trump hired him. So here we are. We got this unitary executive who wants to turn himself into a dictator, and the only thing that can check that is the House, which has the responsibility under the Constitution, Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, to begin impeachment proceedings. And that gives the House extrajudicial powers that they don't have right now, which the president basically is just throwing back at him saying, I'm not going to give you nothing. I'm not giving you nothing. I'm not going to test. I'm not going to allow my people to testify in front of you. I'm not going to send you any documents. You people can just take a walk. And you know, if the framers saw this, they would turn over in their graves. But keep in mind that the framers created the Constitution to address this. And why did they do that? Because we had somebody like that, King George.
Trump is going to suspend the Constitution.
Well, that may be. Don, what's going to happen? What are you going to do when he suspends the Constitution?
Take to the streets.
There it is. There it is.
The Paris Commune.
There it is. There it is.
There's never been a successful overthrow of that kind of a tyranny unless it's people ultimately taking to the streets.
I'm hoping that we can avoid that.
Okay.
To some degree. I mean, I think of all the revolutions that have happened, and why are we where we're at now? I thought we had won the revolution, but we haven't. We haven't finished this revolution.
No, we haven't.
No, but like I say, we haven't lost the ability, all ability, to address this. If the House will take on the responsibility that the framers put upon them in the Constitution. That needs to happen.
Okay. I'm going to...
And they're doing that. I mean, they're subpoenaing documents. They're now issuing subpoenas to the documents that they requested.
But the money puts the representatives into power.
It's true, but I'll tell you, I think this one is just too raw. It's in your face. I think that there are representatives in Congress who see this for what it is.
And because it's the House.
I hope. Because like you,
what about his base?
If it's not, then it's going to go to the bloodshed, the revolution.
Constitutional crisis. Is that what we're talking about?
That's a constitutional crisis, yes. And it's declared by the Democrats. I mean, I'm no lover of the two-party system that we got, but I see both of them in the pockets of the corporations. But
there needs to be a genuine other party.
Well, there needs to be campaign finance reform. If you don't take the ability of big money to manipulate elections out of the elections, we're going to end up with it over and over again. And that's where the revolution failed. We got rid of King George, but we didn't get rid of King George's corporations. And they're still running in our midst.
I think the Tea Partiers are coming back again.
Well, it depends on whether you're talking about the real Tea Party or the racist Tea Party.
Oh, man, okay. The planetary crisis. You want to talk about the planetary crisis?
Well, the planetary crisis is a part of what humanity is doing to the planet.
Yes.
And if we don't do something about ourselves, period. I mean, E.O. Wilson, he's saying we've got to take at least half of the Earth and devote that to biodiversity. Yeah. Turn that over to the life support systems that are operating out there. And the rest of it, we can play what we're doing, but we can't harm what's there. And that's just one thing. Yeah. But then when you look at this book I just finished, I finished this book 2 days ago, The Uninhabitable Earth, Life After Warning by David Wallace Wells. David Wallace Wells.
Yeah.
Today's headlines are we've reached 415 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the lead global warming gas.
It's way beyond 350.
When I did my first slide presentation, or the, what do you call it, Microsoft's
PowerPoint.
PowerPoint. When I did my first PowerPoint presentation in 2008, Hansen was testifying in front of Congress, and he was saying, we have passed a tipping point of 350 parts per million. Today there's 380 parts per million in the atmosphere. That was in 2008. And now here we are 11 years later, and we're at 415, and
climate change is going on now.
Right, and you've got, I just excerpted out some articles, like, for instance, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said on Sunday, yesterday, that the world is not on track to curb global warming to 1.5 degrees threshold. The paradox is that things are getting worse on the ground. Political will seems to be fading. This is crisis. I mean, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said we've got 12 years to turn this thing around. And we're not going to turn it around. We're just going to mitigate, is what we're going to do. We can't stop.
It's too late.
We can't stop. Yeah, but it's not too late to stop the progression into no life on the planet at all, because we have gone past 3-4 degrees worth of warming above pre-industrial levels.
And that'll be the end of our democracy, or the end of life.
That'll be the end of life, and democracy will be gone before that. And it is going, because, again, look at the man that we've got running the show right now. He doesn't believe in climate change. He's not a climate scientist. He's a demagogue, but he doesn't believe in climate change. And so it's all a hoax by the Chinese, supposedly. And he's doing away with environmental regulations, and it's craziness. It's absolute craziness. And the ultimate problem with it all is that it comes down to the question. It's not like you're waiting around to find the truth. The question is if you don't do anything, you're going to find the truth. And that's what we're confronting. We are confronting the truth. We're seeing it now. I mean, Madagascar just had 2 typhoons in a year. It's never happened in the history of weather recording. We've never seen 2 typhoons in a year.
Extinction, revolution?
Extinction, well, the 6th extinction.
Yes.
The Anthropocene, that's what we're all involved in, the uninhabitable Earth. And you look at the title of this book and you think to yourself, this got to be a doomed book, and it is. It's bad. It shows it. This guy as a journalist is really good, and he has marshaled the evidence together, and he shows what we are confronting. And he himself has no background as an environmentalist or anything like that. And so what's happening is he suddenly gets to the end of the chapter and he says, it really is up to us.
We got to stop, because my depression is going to go into despair. Okay, so let's have some
Don't
time
let
for
your
Kathy.
depression go to despair.
So-
Listen to Kathy.
No.
So
Kathy, ready for you?
So I would throw out a different phrase, which is extinction rebellion.
Extinction
Rebellion.
Not revolution, rebellion. There's a
Rebellion.
difference between revolution and rebellion. Yeah.
Right, and that is happening internationally. It's happening in our country. It's happening in the Pacific Northwest. We have to look at what we can do locally, because right now on the federal level, the getting rid of regulations, erasing climate science data out of federal agencies isn't moving us in the right direction. So the thing is, we have to do what we can where we can to keep it in the ground, to keep fossil fuels in the ground.
All right, so
So,
you
So
wanna
what are you
talk-
doing?
so the state of Washington actually
We have 3 minutes
Yeah.
left for
Okay.
Kathy, all right. Zenith Energy.
Okay, so I mentioned earlier that they were going to site a huge fossil fuel crude oil terminal at the Port of Vancouver. We stopped that. However, we thought that was a good thing. We had decreased the likelihood of having explosions or spills in the Columbia River.
Zenith Energy.
So there is Zenith Energy in Northwest Portland is conducting a stealth campaign to become the first Pacific Northwest exporter of
Balkan
crude oil. And so what they did, they're a former asphalt plant, and they, in 2014, got permits to do some construction. And then they sort of waited around for a while, and now they are
That's crude.
expanding, and they're
They're doing it on the sly.
right. And so what they're going to quadruple the number of oil trains, unit oil trains that come through the Columbia River through the
And they'll
Columbia
come,
Gorge.
they'll come
Crashing
down
engines.
through. They'll come down through Vancouver and into Portland.
Right.
On and on.
And they're sidestepping all of the concerns that we've had in the Northwest about oil spills and explosions and risk to the environment. And they are close to succeeding.
Okay, so we have a
There's
link.
There's a group called Zenith Collaborative that's been putting on forums, and they've had 4 or 5 of them they've had 4 of them in Portland, and I live in Vancouver, and because Vancouver is threatened, we're having a forum on May 20th. It is at the Vancouver Downtown Library.
This
We
is
need
the
those links, guys. There it
And
is.
yeah, that link will take you to the link for this event. But if you want to know more about that Zenith Energy threat, you should go to the other link, which
community
is
forum?
there's a tar sands stop tar sands pdx.weebly.com.
There it is.
Yeah,
There it is.
that will tell you as much as you need to know about the Zenith Energy threat.
And you can always email us or
Right,
call
and
us.
the other
you
two, the Oregonian and the Oregon Public Broadcasting did 2 articles, one on April 4th and one on April 6th. The Oregon Public Broadcasting one laid out what Zenith Energy was doing, and the Oregonian actually has been tracking this and recently said that the mayor is telling us that this isn't an expansion, it's simply a modernization. But we need to get the Portland City Council and the mayor in the right direction, which is figuring out a way to stop crude oil trains from increasing in the gorge.
Fossil fuels have to stay in the ground.
Right.
all right, community forum.
So the community forum, if you haven't been to one of those in Portland, come up to the Vancouver one at the library on May 20th, and it's from 6 to 5:30 to 8 at the Columbia Room at the Vancouver Library downtown.
Right,
And the other thing, and this is where Extinction Rebellion and young people come in to play.
Yeah, this is important.
There was a lawsuit that was
There
is a lawsuit that was started in 2015. It's called Juliana versus the United States, and it is 22 plaintiffs who assert that through the government's actions that cause climate change, it has violated the youngest generation's constitutional rights to life, liberty, and property, as well as failed to protect essential public trust resources. This lawsuit is going to be heard in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals on June 4th.
Downtown
yeah.
Portland, they're going to put up a big screen in the park blocks, and you can watch the oral argument.
Right, or you can stream it online. But we want to get at least 4,000 people down to Directors Park, which is near Pioneer Courthouse Square.
And our time is running out, so
Okay.
we're going to need to stop here because I want you to look at the camera and say 30 seconds to the viewers or what we talked about so far tonight, anything else that we didn't talk about. Look at it right there.
Hey, you know, we are facing a constitutional crisis. We're facing a planetary crisis. It is the end of democracy, or it is the end of life, and in the end, it is up to us to determine whether that's going to be the case. I encourage you to get involved. We both do. We encourage you to get involved and make a difference.
That's enough for you, Kathy.
I think that rather than despair over what's happening federally, we have to find ways to support young people to get out there. This is their lives that are in the balance. The three of us aren't going to be around for the outcome of all of this, but they will be, our children and grandchildren. So we need to help them see what the risks are to continuing on the path that we're on, and then we need to support them to do the right thing, and
We need to listen to them.
exactly.
Okay,
Right.
then we have time for about one public service announcement. Not the nation, let's pass that, but here and do the ACLU, the American ON corporate personhood. That's the most important one. Move to amend.org to state that corporations are not persons and money is not speech. And I'm so glad you guys came tonight again.
Thanks a lot.
I love you so much. I do.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks.
And remember, KFC, not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable. Especially you two.
Actually, we
Good
need to.
night. See you next time. Bye-bye.